Welcome to the Doors Center for Social Justice, Education and Research Annual Social Justice Night. My name is Anna Sandage, and I'm the co-director of the Doors Center for Social Justice, along with Dr. Jamie Curley. I'll be your main facilitator for this evening, and so we'd like to begin. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov said, "Human fallibility being what it is, victory and truth do not always go together. Therefore, if you have to always win, you can't always be true." We want to make clear that tonight is not a debate. It's a conversation. It's a shared search for truth and understanding. We are very pleased to have Walter Block and Four Arrows join us as they share their experience of cooperatively arguing differing worldviews of social justice education. We invite you to join us in this experiment. We don't know what will happen as we share very personal and passionate views regarding social, economic, and environmental justice. But we are grateful that you have chosen to be here with us this evening, especially considering that the Cards are in the playoffs. Last spring, we explored multiple perspectives of social justice through an interdisciplinary colloquium. Tonight, we continue to examine the complex nature of social, environmental, and economic justice. We at the Doors Center believe that through the development of transdisciplinary teams, we can build on previous and current work to contribute to the advancement of knowledge and develop holistic strategies and solutions to global challenges of today and tomorrow. But in order to build on those teams, we need to better understand differing worldviews, beliefs, as well as theoretical and professional expertise. Through that understanding, we are able to identify when another perspective has a greater chance of success in working toward the common goal of a better and safer world for all. Tonight is a chance to share ideas around different views of achieving social justice. This conversation is about shared thinking and a chance to listen deeply to another's ideas. It calls upon us to value the voices of everyone and to listen for understanding. It requires that we listen with open hearts and curious minds. It takes courage to share our personal philosophy, and we are here to honor that courage. We recognize that you all have your personal beliefs regarding social justice based on your learned experiences. As you listen to the speakers this evening, we'd like you to take time to reflect on their words and see how they inform your own understanding and perspectives. My role as facilitator is to help move the conversation along. In just a moment, we will hear from our speakers, Walter and Four Arrows, and they will each speak for 10 minutes to share their ideas personally. Then our student facilitators, Lauren Choate and Bill Otto, will lead our guests through a discussion about their experiences and what they have learned from one another. After all have had a chance to share their ideas and explore the process of writing this book together, I'll return to the podium and invite you to join the conversation. Four Arrows and Walter agreed that Four Arrows should speak first, followed by Walter. And so, gentlemen, welcome, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Actually, Walter insisted that I go first. No, we agreed, and I hope it's not the last thing that we will agree on this evening. I am Four Arrows. It's an English translation of my Lakota name, Wakhimpetopa. But I also, I want to let you know that although I wear and use that name in my work over the last, say, 8 or 9 years, I'm equally proud of my Anglo name from my Irish heritage, that comes really from my family here in St. Louis. I was born and raised in St. Louis, and Donald Trent Jacobs was my namesake. So I just want to let you all know that I'm equally proud of my Anglo side, but that I believe that there is something in the indigenous worldview that is important to learn in the same way that my colleague believes that there's something important in the libertarian worldview that's important for us all to learn. How many are here because your instructor said you had to be here today? Raise your hand. Okay. I just wanted to know, what I need to do. Maybe I'll tell you a joke, because I think we can warm you up to why we are here with a joke that just came to my mind. There were 2 drunken hunters that had just come out of the woods and came upon a pair of tracks. And the first one said, those are elephant tracks. I'm sure of it. The other guy said, no, those are giant buffalo tracks. And so they argued about it, but they decided to follow the tracks. And as they were looking down, thinking only about their particular perspective, that's when the train hit them. I see someone that was assigned this class is thinking about that, right? Walter and I intentionally tried to be sober when we entered into this book. But we also tried to not focus so intently on our particular worldview and our particular arguments, because this is what is happening in our world today. How many of you have gone on a blog recently to look at issues between, say, the so-called left and the right? They're hostile, aren't they? They're name-calling, they're taking sides, they're trying to prove their point with data points. Same thing on the talk shows. If we listen to left-wing radio or right-wing radio, we see these kinds of attacks, and oftentimes they become personal. When I was asked by my publisher to write a book about social justice education and higher education, I thought, I don't want to do anything like that again. I had written the first book exposing Rush Limbaugh's language back in 1992, in which I did deconstruct the fallacies of his words. I didn't want to do that. And so there was one scholar, Dr. Walter Block, who I had read a number of his articles, and I couldn't remember anyone I had disagreed with more. And I assumed from what he wrote that he couldn't find too many people that he disagreed with more than me. And so I wrote him a letter and invited him to write a book in which we really tried to understand one another. Now, I had not read the book until last week, okay? Because, when you write a book, you're doing the process. But I read it for the first time. And I want to publicly apologize to my colleague because I violated my own intentions as a cooperating arguer because for the first 100 pages, I said things like, you've got to be kidding me, or that's ridiculous, or that's absurd. He never did that. He never did that. He said at the end of the book that that we both violated that, but I couldn't find a place where he did. So, for example, on page 50, he indicated that at one time, he said one of his debate opponents was laughing at his philosophy, and I wrote, well, Walter, on one hand, I find that disrespectful, but on the other hand, I understand how a sense of humor might be helpful in contemplating your ideas. And in other places, I said, Walter, you're either an alien from another planet, a religious fundamentalist, a white man who will say anything for the dollar, or you're someone with a perspective that must have enough grains of truth in it to make it very important for me to understand it. And so, Walter, thank you for that. And the kinds of ideas that I was referring to, these are quotes from Walter, is scientists who claim that there is ozone destruction are merely critics of capitalism, that animals, birds, flora, and fauna do not have intrinsic value, only instrumental value as a means towards human ends, that a critique of sweatshops is nonsense because they offer a better living than the alternatives, that MLK Jr. is a scoundrel, that under capitalism the only way you can become wealthy is by enriching those with whom you deal, that most violence in the trade union movement resulted from the workers, that one has to admit that African Americans in the U.S. who came here because of slavery are better off than those who remain behind, that if we want to save whales, we should privatize sections of the oceans and fence them in, that regulations like the Clean Air Act are responsible for pollution, that there is no overpopulation problem, and that there's nothing to teach in college about environmentalism except how to learn the free market system. Now, when I read those even now, I react emotionally to go, wow, I don't get that. But I have to tell you that I never would have thought that I would have compromised on the things that I have, found a common ground that I have. And I never thought that I would see parallels between the indigenous worldview and libertarianism. So I joked with Walter a few minutes ago and said, Walter, we can call this all off because I have signed up as a libertarian now. And he got a big smile on his face. Not quite. Tonight is young.
My first acquaintance with 4 Arrows was some maniac wrote to me with a weird name, 4 Arrows. Come on, give me a break. Saying he wants to co-author a book with me. And I get a lot of weird mail, stuff that I just have to erase. And I was about to erase it, and somehow I didn't. I'm very glad I didn't. He wrote to me saying we should co-author a book, and the first thing I did then was Google him. And, I thought he was some sort of nut, but if he is a nut, he's a nut that's published, 15 books and 200 articles or something, so he was a different kind of a nut than the nuts that usually write to me. So it was a very, very strange experience when I first got with him. I think he had a much better idea of where the whole book was going, and I had a much better idea of typographical errors. I was forever correcting his spelling and stuff like that, and he mine. So it was a cooperative venture. We do disagree. I think we disagree. I was of two minds. Each time I wrote my part, I figured, now I've got him. He's got to become a libertarian. And I said, wait, but if he becomes a libertarian, we have no book. So I said, no, don't become a libertarian yet. At the end of the book, you can become a libertarian. You've got to finish this book. So I was a little ambivalent about this. By the way, if you buy the book, hint, hint, you get the two of us to autograph it for you. And if they're all sold out, you can get a hold of Anna Sandage, and she will forward your email request to buy the book, or you can just Google the book, just 4 Arrows and Walter Block ought to get it. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit about my perspective. What is libertarianism? The reason I want to do that is because this is a group, I think, of social work people mainly, and you might not be fully acquainted with this view, and I think it's important for a general education to be acquainted with all views. My friend, can't say friend, my mentor, John Stuart Mill, said that if you only know one side of the issue, you don't really even know your own side of the issue unless you know the other side too. So it's important to know all sides, and I think that was one of the benefits of the writing of the book with 4 Arrows. I got to know his side better. I don't really agree with him that he was nasty to me. I thought it was all in good fun. So here's our first disagreement. And in my book, Defending the Undefendable, I had a chapter about academic freedom where I just sort of slammed into academic freedom, and he got me to change my mind on that. In this book, you'll see our chapter on academic freedom, and I've pulled back a little bit from my views. So he has certainly affected my views, at least in part. Okay, so what is libertarianism? Libertarianism is the view that the only civilized way we can interact with each other is voluntarily. I see Jamie over here, and she's got a nice pocketbook, and there are only two ways I can get this pocketbook out of her: the voluntary way and the coercive way. The voluntary way, I can say, please, I'll be your best friend forever if you give me the pocketbook. And she says no. And I say, I'll give you $5 for it, and she says no. And I say, I'll give you $50,000 for it, and she says no, it's got sentimental value. Well, I just can't get it. That's a civilized way of dealing with her. The uncivilized way of dealing with her is I come up with a gun and I say, give me that or I'll plug you. And that's vicious, that's uncivilized, that's barbaric, that's nasty. And libertarians make a fetish out of this distinction. We say, on the one hand, voluntary interaction between consenting adults is legitimate, just, kosher, socially just, whatever you want to call it. On the other hand, coercive is bad. And we all realize that murder and rape and theft are coercive activities, and none of us would do those things, except, and here's where libertarians diverge from the mainstream, or from most people, we say that even if you vote for it, it still doesn't count. If it's coercive, it's no good. Even if a whole bunch of people vote that I should get her pocketbook, I still shouldn't get a pocketbook. Look, Hitler came into power through a democratic process. Does that mean that what he did is right? Of course not. So libertarians are the only ones that say that the non-aggression axiom not only goes for interpersonal one-on-one interaction, but also it goes for the government. The anarcho-libertarian view is that the government is per se a thief, a murderer, because they compel you to pay taxes. If you don't pay your taxes, they'll write you a nice letter, hey, did you forget? And a week later, they'll write you another letter saying, better pay, and eventually they'll come with a gun and they'll put you in jail, which is kidnapping. So that's where the libertarian stands apart from the average person. We all adhere to the non-aggression action axiom in our personal lives. When it comes to political, the libertarians diverge from everyone else. Let me mention foreign policy, civil liberties, and economics very briefly, because I'm sort of running out of time. In foreign policy, perhaps the libertarian that you people are most acquainted with is Ron Paul. And his view of foreign policy is we should be on defense, not on offense. You know, there's that joke, do you know the difference between a bathroom and a living room? And if you say no, I say don't come to my house. Well, do you know the difference between offense and defense? If you don't, then don't get into political economy. Defense means if somebody comes over here and starts shooting us, well, we defend ourselves. Offense means we have, 800 bases in 130 different countries, and we call that defense? That's crazy. So when President Ron Paul takes office, the first thing he'll be doing is, he was asked, well, how long would it take to get the troops back? He says, well, as long as the boats and the planes take, that's how long it'll take. So we would have just defense, not offense. On civil liberties, he also adheres to the non-aggression axiom of anything between consenting adults, including capitalist acts between consenting adults. And he's the only one, I think Gary Johnson also agrees with this, who favors legalization of drugs for consenting adults. It's a victimless crime. If you put crap in your body, it's your own business. Now, this should be distinguished from favoring the use of heroin. He doesn't favor, libertarians don't favor the use of heroin, just oppose putting people in jail for putting poison in their body. The third one is economics, and here, Four Arrows and I did most of our work. Let me just talk about unions, because that was a bone of contention. To me, what a strike is two things, a union strike. It's two things. One, a mass quit. People just leave their job en masse. And two, they prevent other people from taking the jobs that they say they don't want. Now, a mass quit is justified. A quit is justified because if you can't quit, you're a slave. Look, the only problem with slavery was you couldn't quit. I mean, otherwise it was pretty good. You got to pick cotton, you could sing songs, they gave you food. It wasn't so bad. But you couldn't quit. That was the key. So to quit is to be a non-slave situation. So if one worker has a right to quit his job because he doesn't like the wages or the working conditions, does that mean others can't? No, they can too. So if a union limited itself to a mass quit, that would be fine. That would be compatible with libertarianism. But what unions nowadays do, and I think always, in addition to a mass quit, they somehow think that they have a right to engage in hate speech. They call people scabs, and they try to beat them up. Or when they're not acting in a blue-collar way, they act in a white-collar way, namely they get a law passed saying that the employer has to deal with them and can't deal with someone else. I mean, you know, when a husband and a wife get a divorce, it's a sad thing. It's a failure. But if the husband surrounds the ex-wife's house with his friends, and anytime she tries to date someone else, they beat him up, that's not cool. That's a violation of the libertarian non-aggression axiom. So this is just one area that Four Arrows and I might have different views. We'll have to see in the discussion period whether that's true or not. Another thing, very briefly, on income distribution, people say, well, we should take money from the rich and give it to the poor. I think people like that are hypocrites. I look them in the eye and I say, do you have two eyes? And they say, yes. I say, well, then you're a hypocrite. Because what's the point of redistributing money from rich to poor? How about eyes? You know, there are some people that have no eyes, and you've got two. You should be giving up one of your eyes. And they look at me as if I'm weird. And I think perhaps you people will look at me as if I'm weird by saying this, but the truth of the matter is, if you really favor income redistribution from rich to poor, then you have to, then you're a hypocrite if you have a wristwatch, if you have a house, if you have a car, if you have things like that. Why aren't you giving that up to other people? Paradoxically, you'll have more income equality in a free market capitalist society than you will in a coercive one. And I can't tell you why, because this guy is bigger than me and he's giving me the stop sign, so I'm going to get off here. Thanks for your attention.